Test, test, test.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, I have 5:45. We will go ahead and call the meeting to order. If everyone would stand for a moment of silence, and then we'll have the pledge. And at this moment of silence, if everyone would think about the kids and families involved in the shooting in Knoxville today. Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands. Recorder, if you'd call the roll. Present.
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 Here. Here.
Very good. We do have a quorum. Mr. Superintendent, would you lead us through our agenda?
I will. The first item on the agenda is the opportunity for public comment.
Would anyone from the public like to speak? Hearing none. Next item.
Next item is our report section, starting with the chairman's welcome.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our business meeting for this month. We have a fairly full agenda, but hopefully we'll have some good discussion as we move through these important items before us. Having said that, we'll move to the next item.
Next item is the TLN representative update.
So there was quite a bit I covered last week, so I'm just going to give some updates as of last week. I had made mention about a couple of bills becoming law, and those are still on the way. The one about child abuse with the federal law, also about the teacher reciprocity. But I did want to make mention about another bill that it was a separate bill from the reciprocity, the alternative licensure. I was emailing our representative or our contact at TSBA, Ben Torres, and the alternative licensure bill is at the House and Senate Finance right now, but he said that it's likely it will not be in the governor's budget and will roll to next year. So I just wanted to mention that update because those were not one bill, they were separate bills. The bill I also mentioned last week, SB 1223, HB 890, which is regarding students who have violence being able to not be assigned an alternative school. That has, since last week, passed the House and the Senate at this point. Most of the bills I mentioned last week, they've made progress as far as, for example, SB 224, HB 155 is the Joint Economic and Community Development Boards in the county level. That is now passed the Senate. A couple of the other bills, they've also moved forward, and those would include ones that a school district is not closed for the purpose of virtual education. Also, the Grow Your Own Teacher bill has progressed as well and continues to look like it will pass. Other ones I wanted to make mention on is that there was a bill, if districts were behind and not showing progress, that the superintendent and the school board could be recalled, and that bill has been deferred until next year. There was also a bill about how much school boards have to do a competitive bid, raising the price from $10,000 to $25,000. There was an amendment that this would only be for populations of 40,000 or more in the county, so that's progressing with that amendment. The bill regarding open enrollment within a school district continues to progress. Holding the BEP harmless, which, as Dr. Horrell mentioned last week, will actually not affect our district because we were one of the few that grew. It continues to progress. And finally, I also wanted to mention that a couple of things from the governor today. The governor and the State Board of Education, the governor supported it, and the State Board of Education is planning, I believe they've already passed it, but they haven't yet given an update from their meeting this morning. But they were planning to have a final hearing on the continuous learning plans that allow for virtual education this year, that would only be allowed in a governor-issued emergency, governor-declared emergency. So in other words, the governor's not planning to have any kind of remote learning schools next school year, unless obviously a student was enrolled specifically in some type of virtual specific education. And finally, the governor did mention today about ESSER 3.0 came out, and that the state of Tennessee has now gotten $4.5 billion extra in education money, which, to put that in perspective, the annual budget's normally $3 billion. So this is quite a bit extra to be spent in a pretty short period of time. So there's also going to be more guidance on what this new round 3.0 will include. I think that was the highlight since last week.
That's a lot, for sure.
Report.
Yep.
Any questions on the TLN report? Mr. Burnett?
One question. I'm just trying to understand what the deferment for the alternate licensure. You said, were there budgetary impacts? And I just apologize for not reading.
No. To be honest, it wasn't even in the TSBA emails. So I emailed them to ask specifically about it because I did know that it was not the same bill, even though we mentioned a lot of times and it's an agenda, as you know, reciprocity and alternative licensure, but it was separate bills. And so I asked him and so I looked at the budget, the amendment itself, the bill itself, and they had indicated the first year would take like $1.3 million to institute with doing it was like a long list. I can send it to you of I guess the initial startup of who monitors these type of licensures that the people who, like we had mentioned, like welding, you're not a licensed teacher, and what you would have to do to become this alternative licensure path. Now, it did say years going forward, it would be around I think $300,000, but the initial startup would be a financial impact. So it's not deferred yet. It's just Ben seemed to think that it was not in the budget and that it will probably roll to next year.
Good. And go ahead, Mr. Burnett.
One other question, unrelated. I got an update in my other full-time job about dual enrollment. Currently, dual enrollment is funded by the state it'll pay for 2.6 classes in higher ed, and there's conversation about extending that to a full 4 classes. Doesn't have any impact for us as a school board, as a school system yet, but hopefully that to ones that maybe we follow.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. Any other comments or questions on the TLN report? Hearing none. Next item.
Next item is the superintendent's report. I do have a few additional things I'd like to share with the school board and with the community. One, I want to recognize our outstanding music teachers at both schools. We were again recognized with a Best Communities for Music Education Award, and it's actually a fun collaboration, honestly, to do this application because I work with the teachers themselves to answer the questions. And this year focused on what are you doing basically to overcome the challenges of the pandemic. And just I was aware of some things, and there were some things I was not aware of that they just have continued to do. And really, what's the most impressive is I think the spirit in which they do these things. There's just been a real attitude from the very beginning of we can do this, we can figure this out. There are different ways to teach the things that we always teach, and I think they've, like all of us, have learned some new ways to maybe teach some things and some new methods and tools in their toolbox. So congratulations to those teachers and principals. It's always nice to be recognized for your hard work as they have been recognized, and I know they're also they express their gratitude to the school system and school board for the support that you provide and the emphasis on music education as well. I want to acknowledge the Arlington High School graduation will be on May 17th, and our board members have received their invitations from Arlington High School, as have I, which I know we all always appreciate the opportunity to be there to celebrate the Lakeland students in particular. I'm sure we have a soft spot for them, but all the students that will be graduating from Arlington High School, and really in this very difficult year. I know we're glad that they'll be able to have an in-person ceremony this year, and glad to have that on the calendar. I will ask the school board members if you'd like to let me know if you're able to attend that night or plan to attend. I can send one RSVP to Ms. Chisholm at the high school, and you can let me know after the meeting if you'd like, and I'll pass that on your behalf. Speaking of which, we also got information about the TSBA annual conference today that I know Ms. Millspaw forwarded to the board, and so those rooms are coming available soon. So if maybe we could huddle up afterwards, and sorry, we're not going to huddle up in COVID. We will discuss who is planning to attend this year, so we can go ahead and make sure we get the rooms booked that we want to there. But also exciting to see some of these things returning to in person with the appropriate precautions For sure. I wanted to give an update on the in-person testing. I've shared with this board that the state's expectation for school systems is that that all students take the TCAP tests or our standardized tests in person, and the state's expectation is that 80% of students in a district participate in those in-person tests. We did send home some information requesting feedback from parents who may not feel comfortable coming in to test, and I'm happy to report that right now we have 98% of our students that are saying that they intend to take the tests in person, which is not that far off of how many take the test sometimes typically. You have
Right.
students that are unable to take the test for various reasons, so very encouraging number there. It seems certainly seems probable, I'll say, that we meet the 80%. The 80% mark there, so definitely proud of that number. Speaking of proud, I also want to acknowledge our baseball team, baseball and softball teams that are finishing up seasons, and the baseball team in particular won 2 games. I know Ms. Thomas was there to see one of them last week, and it's been just proud of both those teams and their coaches for getting yet another sport started at Lakeland Preparatory School this year. We don't spend as much time now talking about COVID-19 as we once did, although our teachers and students and parents continue to be diligent. But I did think it was worth noting that we tabulate our student and staff cases every week, and we report them both to the Joint Task Force, and we report them also to the state COVID dashboard. We have had 0 student or staff cases in 3 of the last 4 weeks. In one of the last 4 weeks, there were 3 student cases that kind of hit at the same time. We have only had 1 staff case since February 23rd. So fairly remarkable considering where we've been. I think we're definitely seeing the impact of the vaccinations that have been offered in the schools among the staff. So that has been, I think, gratifying and certainly encouraging to see. I also want to note that the letters that we've discussed, that I talked about in my message before spring break, have started to go home to students, inviting them to our summer learning opportunities. These are the state mandated summer learning opportunities. I did want to note, both for the board and for the public, to the extent that they hear this is being communicated at the school levels, but this is not, I want to be clear, this is not punitive. Being invited to one of these camps does not mean that your child certainly did anything wrong or is not succeeding academically. The fact of the matter is that the state is requiring that a certain percentage of students at every school in the state be invited to these camps. So there's not an option to say our students don't need them or our students are doing great and we don't need the camps. There is a requirement that a certain percentage of students be invited to these camps. So there are some data sets that are being used to determine who might benefit the most from these camps, and some metrics that the state has set that require that certain students be invited. But again, it's not, I want to be clear, it's not a reflection on the child's performance or certainly their work, and it's definitely not a reflection on the teacher's work this year. It is just a new state requirement that, as we've discussed, came up suddenly, and we are doing our best to implement and, frankly, to take advantage of. I mean, if we can get students that, can get a little extra help in the summer, we intend to provide it. So that's the situation with the summer learning camp letters. And that concludes my regular report. If there are any questions about that, we'll briefly go over the financial summary next.
Question for the superintendent? Ms. Childs.
Have you, given the update you just gave us about like only 1 staff case since February 23rd, have you shared that with the staff? And the reason I ask is it could potentially be encouraging for those who haven't yet gotten vaccinated but might want to, because I know I have a friend that works in a hospital and they all had the opportunity to get vaccinated in December, and yet every week more staff slowly but surely get vaccinated.
I can certainly do that. I think 2 weeks ago, I sent something out that noted that we had not had student or staff cases for the previous 2 weeks, but I can certainly up that. I did not get specific about the 0 staff cases since the 23rd, and that's a great idea, and can certainly be part of my next communication with them, for sure.
Any other questions for the superintendent? Ms. Thomas.
In last week's meeting, you mentioned that you'd had a good response from teachers to participate in the summer learning. You still feel, have you gotten a response from kids yet? Has it reached that point where you've gotten a response from the kids who have been invited to see what the possible numbers might look like? And do you have enough staff to accommodate every?
We sent that out on Friday, or the
Okay.
school sent that out on Friday, and I think we had maybe almost 70 that had replied in the affirmative in the meantime. My understanding is that the parents that have contacted the schools have for the most part, been very positive about the opportunity. So it's not quite, we haven't had enough time probably to know what
Right.
the staffing looks like. Yeah, so
And
that's
can
it's
you-
still very
Can
tentative.
you elaborate on what grades we're talking about, just so that parents are aware what groups of kids are being invited?
Yes, and I'm gonna double check to make sure I don't misspeak here, if that's okay.
I put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. So at LES, it's students entering grades 1 through 5, and at LPS, it's students entering grades 6 through 8. Should have been pretty easy to remember probably, but I didn't want to be wrong. So it's basically anybody who's currently in grades K through 7 could potentially be invited.
Which is different from what's happening a couple years down the road, where it'll focus on third graders. So that was another thing.
Correct, yeah,
Right.
the retention law focuses on third graders and what are the options to, besides retention, that would keep them from being retained,
Right, okay.
essentially. Yep,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Any other questions for the superintendent? Hearing none, next item.
Next item is the financial summary. The financial summary, as always, is attached to the agenda for the business meeting. Nothing specific to point out there as we move towards the end of the fiscal year, which ends June 30th. At this time, we're not reporting any anomalies in the financial summary.
Questions on the financial report? Hearing none, next item.
Next item, we move to the approval of the agenda.
Any additions to the agenda?
I would like to request consideration of a couple of, one change and one addition
Okay.
from the board.
Dr. Hoare, the floor is yours.
Okay, on discussion number 5, I would like to, I would like to match the resolution title to the actual resolution that's being presented tonight for the first time. So the resolution title would be a resolution requesting consideration of land donation from the city of Lakeland for a future Lakeland School System central office.
Objection to that change? Board? Hearing no objection, Madam Recorder, were you able to get that? Very good. We will amend the agenda accordingly. Dr. Horrell, what else did you have?
I'd also like to request the addition of an item 6 that would come right after 5 and move down the review policy manual. And this would be discussion action on a piggyback agreement between Lakeland School Board and LADS, LADD''S.
Any objection from the board to adding this item to the agenda? Hearing no objection, we will add this item to our agenda as item number 6, and the current number 6 will be number 7. Any other additions to the agenda? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Any opposed? The agenda is approved. Next item.
Next item is the consent agenda. The consent agenda has 4 items: the approval of the business meeting minutes from March 8th, discussion action on FY 21-22 salary schedules, discussion action on the spring 2021 discard list, and discussion action on 21-22 school nutrition agreements.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor? We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Are there any items anyone would like to remove from the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Next item.
The next item, we move into our discussion items. The first is discussion action on the FY 2021-22 budget.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor? We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Dr. Horrell, would you like to speak to it?
I would. I gave the budget presentation last week, and I appreciate the board members giving the considerable time and effort that they do every year to go over the budget on their own time and then meet with me and have substantial conversations about the contents of the budget between the work session and the actual business meeting. There was one minor edit that came up and is reflected in the budget as it is posted now, and that's not uncommon, that between the work session and the business meeting we make changes. This was a simple change regarding $850, and I'm going to let Ms. Rosales explain that. Even though I didn't set up the podium mic, I'm going to let her use my mic so it'll go through.
So basically, it's going to be a net wash between accounts that were already there, so it's a net effect of 0 to the overall budget. But we have two separate sets of audit fees, one that runs through the city and one that we pay directly. Our single audit, we reimburse our half to the city. That, per our contract, increased $1,700 this year, so our half was $850. So we just did a transfer from our contracted services line item in fiscal services and moved that to our transfer out account. And so you'll see less $850 in fiscal services, an additional $850 in transfer out for net effect of 0. But they have to match with the city because
Right.
collectively we're one budget, and
Right.
so their transfers in and our transfers out have to equal.
Very good. Thank you. I think that makes sense. Any questions about that particular item of the budget?
The only thing I would add is, and it's not something we have to discuss or whatever, but the revision date on it, if it was revived after our work session, then the revision date of this budget that's published online would be incorrect. So we just need to clerically make sure we have.
Okay. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. We can definitely do that. You're correct. It says,
One is what I just pulled up online. Maybe I pulled up the wrong.
no, actually, it says 4/8.
I need to
Hit refresh. Yeah.
Okay. Still says 4/1. Am I looking at that?
I have the same problem, and I refreshed and I see 4.8 now.
Double check and make sure that happens, but. All right, so Dr. Horrell, would you like to continue through the budget, or are you?
That's, unless there are any questions, like I said, there weren't any additional changes based on the budget conversations with school board members. So no, I really don't have anything to add to the budget conversation.
Any questions for Dr. Horrell, Ms. Thomas?
Thank you for your work on this. I know it's what you do, but I'm always in awe about something so huge being so organized and easy to understand, so thank you.
Ms. Rosales does an incredible job, for sure, with the budget in particular, but really with every aspect of what she does.
Any other questions for Dr. Horrell? I do have one. I think I ask this every year, but as we go through the budget, one of the things we like to make sure is what we're doing for the children. And Dr. Horrell, if you wouldn't mind, just because as you look at this budget, tell me how you think we're enhancing the student experience in Lakeland.
And to his credit, Chairman Floyd does ask that every year because I think that's his focus. So I'm a little prepared for it, I guess. When we look at the budget, at the end of the day, what we try to make sure is getting the most attention is the teachers. I mean, one thing I've always said, it's the teachers at the end of the day that make the difference for students. So when we talk about honoring the step increases, which again are not necessarily automatic in some systems, and then certainly the 2% increase, what we want to do is make sure that we're attracting and retaining the teachers that we feel like can do the best job for the students. And keeping the student-teacher ratios as low as we can keep them. And we've really made a lot of progress in the last several years in particular in terms of kind of going from some higher numbers relative to other systems in the county to among the lowest at both schools in terms of student-teacher ratios. Also, the investment in technology, we continue we've made it a priority every year to refresh Chromebooks so we don't have students that are dealing with Chromebooks that aren't working, increasing our amount of reserve Chromebooks that we say, or loaner Chromebooks is what we wind up calling them, to make sure that if there is an issue, that students have access to those things as well. We're continue to invest in our athletic programs, which is reflected in some of the budget items and in terms of things that we're doing for maintenance around the buildings, certainly student safety. We've as far as the health of the students and making sure that everything's as it should be with our school nurses and in our clinics, and certainly with the mental health supports that we're providing. Those are really the areas of emphasis. You know, you've got those things, and then you've got stuff. I mean, we increase budget items if we feel like that we don't have enough money for the curriculum needs for the students or for the technology needs. It's hard sometimes to quantify exactly what that is, but software programs, we do take student feedback on some of the software that we use. We have heard from students and teachers that particular contract, well, they don't know about the contracts, but they know what the name of the product is, and they know they don't like it. And, you know, if the combination of the students and the teachers say, we don't feel like this helps us learn, then we spend a lot of time going through and making those adjustments. And it's not just the fun stuff, but, you know, does this help me learn the material? So honestly, all of our conversations are student-centered when we have these. Is it good for kids? Is it worth the investment? And that's really the bottom line at the end of the day.
Thank you for that answer. I do have a follow-up question, if you don't mind. As it relates to one of the items you mentioned were athletics, and I know there was a substantial increase in field maintenance. Could you speak to that and tell us how you feel about our ability to manage our fields in an appropriate way?
Yeah, so we're in a transition period here as we go from, we basically have our natural turf football field that we were able to build out early and have been able to take advantage of. I'm sorry, the artificial turf football field. And then we have a natural turf soccer field. We're adding an additional 5 multi-purpose soccer fields, essentially, that are being constructed now. We're going to add a baseball field. We're going to add a softball field. We're going to add a marching band practice field. One of the things that we found, and I can certainly acknowledge over the last year, is that the soccer field has not been maintained to the standard really that we would like to see. And I think we've been in probably a difficult position, and maybe was a little over optimistic about the ability of these fledgling, organizations and new teams to kind of, especially in a middle school situation, to maintain those fields. So admittedly, that's been one area of disappointment. So in order to try to prepare for that, we did increase the field maintenance budget to the tune of about $160,000, which would allow us to, over the fiscal year, have a professional turf management company manage all of those fields for the next fiscal year to be sure that at least until we get to the point where booster clubs and coaches and parent groups and things, really where the school itself can kind of supervise that, the district would be taking that on to make sure that they are as ready for play as they can possibly be and up to the kind of, I think, professional standard that is expected. So that was one of the most really significant kind of investments in the general fund budget to take care of.
Tell us what the budget was previously.
Yes, I can. 1 second.
If I could.
Yes, we were at $15,000 in the prior year, and we're going up to $175,000.
You feel comfortable with this number today, now, and I know there's an agenda item later that we'll get to that kind of touches on this issue as well, but you've spoken to professionals who manage fields, and we're comfortable with this number as it relates to what would be 5 fields, is that right? 6?
This number would be for 9 fields.
9, sorry.
Yeah, over the course of the next year. I've gotten some feedback from parents. I've talked to some board members about field maintenance, and basically what the additional agenda item would do would be allow us to immediately piggyback on a contract that Collierville Schools has with LADS. LADS is a professional athletic turf organization, or at least has, that as part of their company. And the thought would be, and this would be in this year's budget, but we have the amount of money to do this in this year's budget. We would go ahead and enter into that contract essentially early, starting right now, and let them take over the existing soccer field to get it just as good as it could possibly be for the August season, and then continue that into the next year. So that's what the additional discussion item would allow.
Good. Any other comments or questions on that? Sorry, Mr. Burnett.
Just going back to what you said, it's the teachers and the teachers. Quick addition, just base salaries for teachers comes to about 7.3 million out of a $20 million budget. So just base salaries, not including benefits, almost 40, just under 40% of our budget is spent on teachers. It reflects the values of our school system to invest in just what you said, teachers.
Very good. Any other comments or questions on the budget?
And I know we're gonna talk about it, but in terms of financial, whatever, do they, the LADS contract in the future budget, do they feel like that amount will cover the fields basically to be able to, like, we're gonna have them establish, I guess, basically, where they're walking in, brand new fields so is that basic field, or is that like any potential rolling and sanding, or all those? So does that amount have some ability to deal with any of those kind of issues that we face, or is that covered in the contract with Chris Woods in their initial setup? Like, do they roll and, flatten out the fields? Because I know that can become an issue.
That's a great question. One of the things I can tell you for sure that the Chris Woods contract involves laying the sod and rolling. It also involves hand sanding around the edges to make sure that the field seams are tight on the sod and laid appropriately. We are discussing, and this has not been finalized, but we are discussing the possibility of the school system basically taking over the fields early so that LADS would handle that kind of additional maintenance on steroids, because what LADS would do in their contract is beyond what the contractor's contract says.
Right.
So we might request, we've had a discussion about possibly getting a credit back from the contractor,
Okay.
and then putting that towards the actual field maintenance. And to answer your question, the proposal by LADS does include overseeding, top dressing, fertilizing. It does not involve weed control, but that's something that we take care of on our own. So it would be, for the playing fields in particular, a very high standard of maintenance. Reel cutting on,
That's in the budget that we're talking
that is in the $160,000 budget,
Okay.
yep.
Essentially, the 15,000 that's carryover from last year is essentially just cutting the grass around the campus. Is that, yeah?
That's more what we see happening now, yeah.
Right. Very good. Any other? I want to point that out. That's a $160,000 increase in fields, and perhaps we've overlooked the importance of that in the past. But as we move forward, one of the things as we transition towards a high school is going to have to be take care of these things. And I appreciate your willingness and everyone who worked on it to do that, because I think it's important. It's part of the experience that our children, parents, and community gets, and we need to make sure we do that in a way that represents our values. And I think that's important. Any other comments or discussions on the budget? Hearing none. Are we ready to vote on the budget?
Yes.
All in favor of approving the budget, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The budget is approved. Thank you, Dr. Horrell.
Thank you, and again, thank you, Ms. Rosales, and I appreciate all your effort. Next, we're going to move to discussion action on 2022 to 26 capital improvement plan.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor?
Move.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Dr. Horrell?
I certainly don't want to say this is a formality, because capital improvement plans are important. We have tended to have very obvious, publicly discussed and monitored capital improvements in terms of these kind of big big projects that we have. So this one is updated to reflect the actual budget so that our capital improvement plan matches the amounts that is in the budget that you just approved.
A motion to get the, sorry, we have the motion. Any discussion on this item?
Critical issue. Under expenditures, capital improvements to existing buildings, capital is misspelled.
We will make that correction. Any other discussion on this item? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item.
Hello, next item is discussion action on FY 2021 budget amendments.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor? We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Dr. Horrell?
What you're going to see if you look through these budget amendments is, without exception, changes to our federal programs budgets. As the board knows, these frequently change, and we get updated numbers. Some of these are things that we change internally, but many times it has to do with the allocations. It also includes the ESSER 3.0 grant, which is substantial. If you look at that's $2.854 million in the latest round of funds that are being dedicated to schools as part of the federal stimulus plan. And as you can see, it is an allowable expense, and in fact, it's an area of emphasis in both ESSER 2.0 and 3.0 that those funds are able to be used for projects that improve, capital projects that either improve circulation or ventilation and air circulation or the opportunity for social distancing. So we have planned to apply with that in mind to use the funds in that way.
Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item.
Next item is discussion action on the 21-22 Textbook Adoption Committee recommendation.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor?
I'll move.
We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Dr. Horrell?
Thank you. As we discussed, you'll see that the three standing members of the Textbook Adoption Committee are Assistant Superintendent Angie DeLoso and instructional facilitators Tammy Beauvais and Kim Lewis. We ask each school to identify a parent who'd be willing to serve on the Textbook Adoption Committee and be kind of the surrogates for the community as we review textbooks, and those are Marshall Barnes at LES and Susan Key at LPS.
Very good. This item is before us. Any further discussion on the textbook committee?
They have, yeah, thank you for checking, but yes.
Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the textbook committee, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Next item is, if you're ready, next item is discussion action on Resolution 2021-0401, a resolution requesting consideration of land donation from the City of Lakeland for a future Lakeland School System Central Office.
Our motion to get this item on the floor. We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. We talked about this briefly in our work session, but Dr. Horrell, would you like to give us a little background?
Yes, I would. It's, I think as has been discussed, there is one of the new developments in Lakeland is formerly called Lakeland Commons, currently called Lakeland Town Square. We have been approached by members of the city administration and the Board of Commissioners about the possibility of a site for a future Lakeland School System Central Office being one of the institutional anchors of the Lakeland Town Square development. It was discussed recently at a Board of Commissioners meeting about the possibility of the city, which again, my understanding is that the city doesn't currently own the property technically, but that at some point the city will take possession of a couple of those parcels, and that the city preemptively was talking about making a donation to the school system. It was discussed at the Board of Commissioners meeting that it would be most in order for the school system to indicate an interest in that possibility before the Board of Commissioners acted formally upon it. So what I suggested, I was invited to a meeting and asked for some time to talk with the school board, and have prepared this resolution that would allow us, I think, to continue the conversation appropriately. So at some point, I'd like to read this into the record, and then we'll update the website with the language of the actual. It's already on there. Ms. Millsbach can do it in real time. So if you're watching, you can go ahead and click on it, but I can go ahead and read it into the record either before or after discussion on it.
Let's go ahead and read it, and then it'll give the time for the board to hear.
Okay. The resolution reads, whereas Lakeland School System, LSS, Central Office Administration currently shares office space with the City of Lakeland, quote, the city at Lakeland City Hall, quote, City Hall, and whereas the current and projected growth of both the city and LSS staff puts pressure on the capacity of the City Hall offices to accommodate both staffs, and whereas the LSS Board of Education, or BOE, desires to eventually obtain or construct a dedicated facility for LSS Central Office Administration, and whereas the Lakeland Board of Commissioners, BOC, has approached the BOE regarding the potential availability of a possible institutional site for a future LSS Central Office at the Lakeland Town Square development, now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Education of the Lakeland School System that the Executive Committee is hereby authorized to enter into negotiations with the city on the possibility of a site or facility donation from the city to LSS for a future LSS Central Office facility.
Very good. Any discussion on this item? Harrison?
So this doesn't preclude a timeline, it doesn't give an ordering of when this has to be done by, or prevent us from doing other projects where we would potentially do another project before this project. It doesn't commit us in any way such as that. This is just a discussion about a donation of land or facility, not actually expend funds for this in advance of other projects.
That is very well put and 100% correct. This was, it was intentionally written to not obligate the board to any further action. And for those who don't know, the executive committee is defined by state statute as the superintendent and the school board chair. What this does is kind of give me permission from the board to take this resolution to the Board of Commissioners and let them know basically that formally we are open to that conversation. We do not have any of those details that you discussed. In fact, honestly, I have very few details about what this might look like. Certainly, it's an intriguing possibility, and I do want to, I've been in some meetings where I've been asked about the school system's preference. Even over the course of years, we've been asked about, well, would the school system be interested in this building if there was a new city hall built at some point? And this is all, it's been very hypothetical and nothing official. And I'll say certainly we would be if that was the possibility. Would we be interested in land being donated by the city for a future site? Absolutely. We would have to do some due diligence and determine if it really met our needs. We have not done any of that. We don't know, is it the right site? Does it have the right amount of parking? Does it have, in terms of getting into the weeds of the infrastructure that would be provided? I don't know what would be the restrictions in terms of design. Would they be heightened in a planned development as opposed to if we had space on another site somewhere else, for example? This basically just says the executive committee is authorized by this board. There's enough interest by this board for the executive committee to have those conversations, either as individuals or as a pair.
Further discussion on this item? Now, we have said this previously, but I will add that I like the concept, I like the idea, but I'm not in any hurry, and I want to make sure we do the high school right before we spend any further money. But I like the thought behind it. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of approving the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item.
Next item is one of the items that on the amended agenda. It's a discussion action on a piggyback agreement between the Lakeland School Board and LADS.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor? We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Dr. Hoyle, you've spoken to this briefly, but will you go ahead and kind of give us an overview?
Absolutely. So again, by state statute, and this was mentioned by Ms. Childs in her report, as a public school system, we're required to publicly put out to bid, in competitive bid, any item or request for services basically that's more than $10,000 or that would result in an expenditure of more than $10,000. There's a couple of situations where you're exempted from that requirement to put things out for bid, and one is if you piggyback on an existing contract. So in this case, Collierville Schools, who I have spoken to and are aware that we're going to be discussing this with their superintendent, Gary Lilly. Collierville Schools did put out a public bid for athletic turf management of their athletic fields. And they came back with competitive bids, and they selected LADS as their provider of those services, which is one advantage of when I was talking about LADS. I've seen their fields, and they look really good. They've been well maintained and are good looking fields. If we authorize this piggyback agreement, it essentially allows LADS to offer us the same rates or better that were offered to Collierville for those services. So we would not put it out to competitive bid, but the board and the public can kind of rest assured that these same services were bid out publicly recently by a school system, and we're getting the benefit of that bid. So in a nutshell, that's what this would do. One reason, another reason to take this route is that it would potentially allow LADS to get started immediately working on the soccer field and doing, aerating or, overseeding or top dressing or whatever is the first thing they decide needs to be done.
Any discussion on this item? Thomas?
I know we talked about how we didn't know how we were going to handle field maintenance in the future, that we might decide down the road that we have a person who's dedicated to being the field maintenance head. And so number 2 on this agreement says you can have 3 one-year renewal terms beginning July 1, 2022. Of course, the high school opens August 2022, so we will have the opportunity each year to see if we want to remain, if this is the contract we want to continue with, or if we want to make any kind of change. I just wanted to point out that that was there in case we decided we wanted to do something different.
Absolutely, yeah. This gives us a good amount of flexibility to make different decisions.
Childs?
This initial one-year contract, is this just for the soccer field, or is there any?
What this does is, and actually contract is a little misleading. This doesn't obligate the school system to use LADS. It allows the school system to use the rates in that contract. So we could, what we would do now is start immediately with the soccer field. That's the one we have. The others aren't even built. And then if we did want to take on the 5 multi-purpose fields starting once they're installed, which may be, early May, we could set them to work there. And then if we wanted to, moving forward, once baseball and softball come online, we can add those as we go. So we wouldn't start paying, obviously, it's not a kind of contract where you start paying for fields that aren't being maintained. And in fact, you can even pull back on the cuttings, say instead of doing twice a week, we want to do once a week, or we don't want to do the top dressing for whatever reason this year. What the contract says is it lays out their obligation to honor those prices, if that makes sense.
It seems like it would also be advantage if we get the rates that a bigger school system has already negotiated.
Absolutely, I agree. But 9 fields is a lot for a little school system. I'll say that. It's not that many more.
Tell us a little bit about LADS and what their qualifications are, how you, I know Collierville vetted them, but what do you know about them?
Well, they reached out just with some promotional materials, and I'm familiar with them. I know they're local. We have actually worked with them on a golf cart purchase when the middle school opened, and kind of got to know them a little bit there. But they also do golf course maintenance, which is certainly a certain standard of care that's different from, cutting and edging, which is, what most landscape companies do. So they're a group that has professionals employed that specialize in, different kinds of turf management.
Have they been handling Collierville's fields, or is this new for Collierville?
No, they've been handling Collierville's fields.
Okay.
I know they sent some videos of the baseball field on opening day, and
Looks
I'm sure
fabulous.
several of you have seen
Yeah.
Collierville's fields.
Yes.
Your soccer field was really nice.
Yeah.
So, do I remember correctly that the maintenance for the fields we're sharing with the city, we have an agreement with the city to share the cost on the maintenance of those fields, correct?
We do, and I want to be clear. I don't know necessarily that that the city's. It would be unfair to assume that the city's going to pay half of whatever maintenance we decide is necessary. And I also say that on those 5 fields, the ongoing maintenance may not be what the initial maintenance is. I think the ongoing maintenance on your baseball, softball, and primary soccer fields stays the same. It may not be necessary to have that level of maintenance on the 5 fields if they're
Right.
used primarily for parks and rec and more practice things. But our intention is to use LADs to get those fields built up to the appropriate level so we can then make decisions on, for example, we don't need a reel mower to cut those 5 fields. It's a different charge to use a reel mower that can put the striping in and things on a baseball and softball field and on the soccer field. So some of that we'll learn from experience together. And that's why there is an expectation that the city split those costs with us, but I do want to be clear, I have not approached the city with this amount or said it's going to be half of $100,000 or whatever that
Right.
would be. To me, that's what it's going to take to get our fields the way we need them to be.
Gotcha.
And then we're going to have to determine what's the appropriate ask on that from the city. But I will say that the budget assumes that the city pays nothing in, which would not be the case either.
Well, Ms. Childs and I both, we've seen examples of those fields out there, so it's, their work is very impressive.
Personal knowledge that Arlington at one point used LADs before they were stripped and redone. I believe there's discussion about going back to LADs now that the soccer fields have been completely stripped and redone because they have always done such a wonderful job.
So another good endorsement. Thank you. I
Yes.
didn't know that.
My only concern, it's not a concern, my only goal is to make sure we get our fields to a level that is acceptable and meets our standards. And if we feel comfortable based on what we know from Arlington and Collierville and others that have used, and in your conversations, I assume, with them, that this does that, I think this is something we need to do. Any further comments or discussion on this item? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item.
Next item is just a placeholder, the review of policy manual, section 6.
Any discussion, any items anybody would like to talk about policy manual section 6? As always, the board member can bring any items up anytime they would like. Any other business that needs to come before the board? Any announcements? No announcements?
We should probably say, if you haven't consulted the testing schedule for TN Ready, you should definitely check it out, especially if you are at LPS. Do you want to, 2 weeks from now, starting on the 26th, the week of the 26th is 5th and 7th grade are at the building to test all week, and 6th and 8th grades are at home. And then the next week it flips. So just be sure you keep an eye on that and don't send your child the wrong week.
Thank you for noting that. That as you've said, cannot be over-communicated, and we want to make sure that word is out there. So thank you.
Good. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.